Right, so following on from a successful sump project, there's quite a bit of plumbing we need to do on this tank, on this breeding rack to set it all up. And I know better than anybody how, when you've never done plumbing before, how intimidating it can feel when you first start looking at doing some sort of plumbing project on your aquarium, whether that be drilling holes, solvent welding, all the different pieces of plumbing kit you need to add on to this to make it functional. It can seem quite a lot, but it's actually relatively straightforward. So stick around today. I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on plumbing tanks, show you exactly how this system works and what I've used to make it functional. Right, so when it comes to plumbing, I believe that it's not a necessary skill to have in the hobby, but it's a very useful skill to have. So if you've been sort of keeping fish for a while and you know this is something for you and you're going to take the hobby that one step further, knowing how to plumb a tank is quite vital and very cost effective as well, because if you're getting tanks built and stuff, then they charge you a fortune just to drill holes in tanks and fit sumps, and going out and buying a pre-plumbed system can cost an absolute bomb. So if you know how to do these things yourself, it can save you a lot of money in the long term, and then you're avoiding all these barriers where you're having to wait around thinking, oh, I can't do that, I'm gonna have to wait for someone else to do it, I'm gonna have to save up a fortune and buy a already plumbed or drilled tank. So knowing how to do it is really useful. So what I'm going to do is we're going to show you how the plumbing's planned out on this tank, and then we're going to complete some of the bits that I haven't done because I need to get it all attached and plumbed into this sump system so that I can start filling this up ASAP, because I have actually got a couple of cichlids holding in the tank upstairs. So I would like to have this set up so that I can put the babies into it and start getting things going. Now, this entire system, the baby tanks, the breeding units, they're all going to run from this sump. So what the plumbing's going to allow me to do is run all these tanks off one filtration system. In the long run, it's going to be cost effective because that means all these tanks are going to be using one heater, albeit it'll be a more powerful heater and a more expensive heater to run. But it means I'm not going to have multiple heaters in each one of these tanks. There's also the case of the air stones and air pumps. The plumbing, the sump, is going to cause a lot of surface agitation and water movement. So I'm not going to have any issues with oxygenation of the water as well. So I don't think I'm going to need multiple air stones in all these tanks, causing loads of unwanted noise and vibrations when I've got all this movement circulating through the sump. When you go into a fish store and you see multiple tank setups, these are all similar setups. They're all running off a sump at the bottom, a large sump that is powering all these tanks, and it makes it cost effective for the shop. So that's how we're going to plumb this, and I'll give you a look at exactly how I've planned it now. So some of this plumbing isn't complete yet, and there's some bits I need to do which I'm going to show you today. So we'd start off with the sump in our return section. So we need to build the return hose so that we can add it into the plumbing system, but it will run up from here. It'll then get to this pipe where we have a ball valve at the top, and then I've also got a little spout here which I can turn on and off. Now, what that allows me to do is, if I need to shut this system off from the plumbing, I turn this, it cuts off the water supply, and then I'm not running this tank. I can do what I want in it, pull it out, remove it, we'll have no issues. This allows me to control the flow. So if I need a bit of pressure coming back down, I can move this ball valve a little bit and get a little bit more water flow in this tank. It'll then move up, and then this section I've not solvent welded yet, and I'll explain to you why after. But this will be where my other tank sits, which is coming today, and I'll show you how I drill that tank. And then this is where the input for the water is going to be into this system. So we're going to add a ball valve on here so that we can control that. The plumbing then runs along to the baby tanks. Again, I've put another ball valve here so I can control the flow rate in these smaller tanks, because I've drilled smaller overflow sections in these. So if I need to turn the flow rate down, if it's too much for these drilled holes, I can use this ball valve to control the flow. And then at the back of these, you can see they're all plumbed into another pipe, which drops down into the tanks below. So I'll turn these in, and then I'll have a pipe coming in which feeds them tanks. And then same thing applies, they'll drop down into these tanks. So a little bit like a trickle filter sort of system. And then I need to plumb the overflows underneath these so that they can return back into the sump. These bigger tanks I've drilled as well. So you can see I've got an overflow pipe in these. I've drilled a hole in the bottom. And I just need to tighten up them bulkheads. But I'm going to leave the bulkheads off so that I can do some solvent welding on the bottom of one of them. But this tank will drop down into this one. And then this one will overflow back into the sump. So we've got a constant circulation going through all these tanks. And it makes it really really customizable so that I can do all sorts with this kind of setup. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to start plumbing this return section where the hoses are where the pump's going to connect to the return line and back into the system. And I'll show you what pieces of equipment I'm using for that and how I'll put it together. The reason these bits I haven't solvent welded yet is because I'm trying to leave them for last. And the reason I'm doing that is because this stuff, your PVC cement, what you attach everything together with, if I was to plumb all this in the cellar, I'd need a gas mask, because this stuff will get you in a cellar if you're doing it all in here and there's no airflow. And it could be a risk to my fish upstairs if the fumes are going up there as well. So what I've been doing is solvent welding these individual pieces outside bit by bit, and then attaching them all together with the unions on the ball valves and different unions that I've put onto the system. Because these ball valves, you can see they have a screw-in section here, which is really good because it allows you to take the system apart. Now you've got to be careful with what you're actually, when you're looking at ball valves, because some are more expensive than others, and these are the ones that have got the unions on. You can get your simple ball valves, which come in handy for putting in areas where you're not going to need to potentially take apart. But if you want to be able to make certain changes to it, it's good to have these unions and these types of ball valves in there, because it allows you to take the plumbing apart. If you ever need to move it or add things on, it gives you the ability to do it. But we'll crack on, we'll get all our pieces together, what we need for this, we'll solvent weld it in the garden, and then we can attach that on, and then we'll start doing the overflow bit on the tanks as well. Right, so the first thing you need to do is get this pipe and get some equipment attached onto this, which is going to lead to our return pump. So what we do is I'll just do a sort of a push fit practice, obviously measuring your pieces up as well. So first we're going to need our 90-degree elbow there to bring the pipe along here. It's a bit of a contortionist at this, as you can see. And then what I'm going to do is add a union on there. So if I need to, I can take this section off if I need to change the return pump or any of the hose sizes that attach on. I can make customizations to. And then I'm going to use a simple ball valve on this one, because I've got a union here. So if I need to take it apart, I still can do. And what the simple ball valve will do is give me the option to control the flow rate of the return pump. So if the return pump's too much and it's overpowering the system, I can use this ball valve to make some adjustments to it. We'll then add another 90-degree elbow which points down towards the return pump, and then we add something called a spigot on. So you can see it's got these little grippy bits on it, and you should all know what that's for. It's similar to what you get on your canister filters, where we can attach the hose to the plumbing. We attach the other side of the hose to the return pump. We can add some hose clamps on there just to tighten it up. And then you've got your return pump putting all of the water, circulating it back into this system and into the other tanks. So we'll get this into the garden. We'll get it solvent welded together. We'll let it dry out there because, again, like I said, those fumes can be very dangerous if you're breathing them in all the time. So we'll get it solvent welded and let it cure in the garden, and then we'll start working on the overflow bits that are going to come into the sump. Once I've got this in place, I can get the lid on the sump, and then I know where I need to drill the holes in the sump to let the water, the return pipe come through. Now this one's going to be a little bit more complicated because I'm going to need to plumb specific parts to quite precise measurements to make sure that they're matching up with the holes on the back of these tanks. Now, the way I'll do that is I've already got holes drilled into the bottom of the base of this, showing me where the overflow pipes are. So we'll remove the tanks to start with. And then what I can do, instead of contorting and twisting underneath the tank, I can line up all my measurements on the top with these holes, and then I know when I flip it over and put it underneath, it's going to be exactly right. So let me move the camera angle and I'll show you how I do it. Right, so what I'm going to need here is I'm going to need a 90-degree elbow. I'm going to need 2 T-sections, and the 90-degree elbow is going to be going here. We're going to have the 2 T-sections here. So when the water flows out of these bottom tanks, it'll hit the 90-degree, it'll hit the T, it'll all be in one long pipe. So we'll have to get the measurements of the PVC pipe correct. And then we can fit it all together, solvent weld it. And then we've got our return section underneath then, which is going to take it back into the sump. So this should give us the precise measurements of where the overflow holes are in the back of these tanks. And then it should fit together perfect. I'll use this PVC pipe here, and then you can hold it up and see where sort of your push fits are going to end. So if we put the edge there, I can see that that's where I'm going to need to cut. Always, if you're going to do any plumbing project, get these plastic pipe cutters. Don't waste your time sawing them. It takes so long and it leaves loads of burrs around the edges that you need to sand off before you plumb it, whereas these just cut straight through like it's butter. There we go. We'll give that a push fit test now, just to make sure that it fits, and then if we need to trim a little bit off it, we can do. But you can see there, that's perfect. So when we put that underneath, it's going to line up perfectly with those tanks. And then we'll do the same on this side until we've got our system. And then any little cut-offs you get like this as well, I always save them because they come really in handy for when you're doing little short attachments like these 2 90-degree elbows up here. So you can, if you keep a little box of these, it saves you, if you ever do plumbing projects in the future, having to chip into your bigger pieces just to make these little bits that can join stuff together. So it's good to save them. But let's push fit this. And then there you go, all fits together perfect. When we put that underneath on our drop down, we can then lead it into the sump. and start drilling some holes in the lid there so that we can get the overflow section complete on that bit. But again, we'll take these in the garden and we'll solvent weld them with the other bits and then attach it all together. So I'm going to start bonding this together now in the garden, and I'm going to use this PVC cement. Usually come in little tubs and you get a little brush inside the lid to apply it. It is advised that you do use a primer before you add this cement, but I have never used a primer on any of my plumbing projects, and I've never sprung any leaks even when I've done it on high pressure systems. So using a primer is optional. It is supposed to give you a better bond, but I've never had any issues just using the cement on its own. You need to make sure that all your pipe edges are clean, the sockets that you're putting them into are clean before you put this cement in and start bonding it together. But this is where you need to be a little bit careful with the plumbing. So it can be particularly difficult, especially when you're doing these longer stretches of plumbing, if you've got things like T-sections and elbows and they need to be on certain angles. You only get one shot of this, so once you start putting this primer on, it pretty much starts bonding instantly. Now what I do, if I need to level things up, I will, because I haven't got a flat surface in the garden. If you've got a flat surface, you can press it down and get everything level if you're working on a flat surface. But I'll just sort of hold this like I'm looking down the barrel of a gun, and you get a couple of minutes to make minor adjustments before this really starts to set and go solid. Now I'm going to start bonding together the return line. Now you want to be careful sometimes, especially if you've got things like ball valves that you're attaching onto a piece of plumbing, that when you solvent weld it, you're not solvent welding it on an angle where when you put it together, you're not going to be able to turn the valve because it's against a wall or it's against a piece of wood. So now those pieces are cured together, what I'm going to start doing is bonding these little bits that I've left open while I've been doing this in pieces. So unfortunately I will have to do these bits in the cellar, but if I can keep it to a minimum of how much of this glue I'm actually going to have to use and gas out this place, the less I can do, the better, because it means I can work in here still. So let's weld that in. Get that level. And that should create a nice bond there. And then we'll move on to the bottom section and get the return hose plugged in as well. So here's our completed return section for our return hose. So what I'm going to have to do is thread this through and then get it into position and solvent weld it onto the rest of the plumbing system. So it might be a bit of an headache this, but we'll give it a good go. And now I should be able to grab it from the top, get my glue in. This stuff is so potent. So you really don't want to be doing this in an enclosed space because it'll make you very sick. Now this stuff, once you've got the glue wet, it starts to create a bond quite quickly. Now you're not going to get a solid bond on it straight away, but it'll be to the point where it will hold a little bit of weight. So ideally when you're doing a plumbing setup, when you've done all the bonding and let things cure, you need to give it 24 hours before you start running water through it, just to be absolutely certain that it's not going to spring any leaks. I mean, with aquariums, there isn't a great deal of pressure that builds up in these pipes. So if you do have a couple of weaknesses here and there, it's not going to be catastrophic. The main places where I've had leaks when I've done plumbing setups, the only places I've ever had leaks when I've done plumbing setups is on bulkheads or with these unions. If you haven't got an O-ring in place on both sides, then you can spring a leak dead easy, because if it moves slightly or there's a little tiny gap, there's no glue there holding it together. All my pipe work has always been fine. It's just where an O-ring is required. Sometimes you can spring leaks there quite easy. Now I've got all the pipe work in for the overflows now. It's all solvent welded and sturdy. It's had 24 hours to cure. And I can now finally see where my overflow pipes are returning into the sump. So what that means is I can now start getting the lid on, get some markers up on this lid and drill some holes so that I can get these pipes going into the sump, and I can put the lid on it to prevent any additional evaporation and stuff as well. I've got slightly bigger plumbing on the overflow on this tank, just with it being a bigger system. So I want it to have more freedom of flow. If I need to put any more flow direct from the plumbing into it, I know it can handle it. Ideally, if you're plumbing for a display tank, you do want 2 overflow holes as like an emergency, and that can also help quieten down the noise that the tank makes. But I'm not overly concerned about the noise because it's in the cellar. So if there is a lot of trickling and a little bit of gurgling, it's not a big deal. I'm not too fussed about it. But if you were going to have this in a living room or something and plumb it, you'd want a emergency overflow and something that you can add on to there to make the noise more discreet, which I'm going to do on one of these tanks anyway, just so I can give you an example of how to do that as well. But we'll get these holes drilled, we'll get the lids on the sump and see how it looks. Whoopsie. Now we've got a little bit of a, well, I say a little bit, but that's a big crack on there. So that went through very quick, and because it's stood up, it's put the pressure straight on it and cracked it. But what I can do with that is just run a little bit of epoxy resin along the crack, and then that should seal it pretty good. But I don't think that's going to affect its ability to keep the water in anyway, so I'm not overly fussed about it. There it is. I could not be happier with how that's turned out. I mean, I'm a little bit upset about the crack on the lid, but only from a cosmetic perspective. I mean, all I need to do is run a little bead of either silicone or some epoxy resin, which I think will be less offensive on the eyes, and it should seal that off so I'm not getting any evaporation out of there anyway. But the plumbing fits in perfect. It's nice and flush. It goes straight into these pre-filters. There's not a lot of gaps there that are going to let evaporation out. And it looks great. I mean, I've got the lids on the middle section, which isn't letting any evaporation out. So that's nice and airtight in the middle. And then I've got 2 holes in the last section of the sump. The reason being is I've had to cut a hole in the corner just so I can get plug sockets and stuff out of that corner if I want to put any electricals in here. Obviously, we're going to have the return pump. The heater, I'm a little bit cautious about putting it in this plastic section, just in case the sump runs a little bit dry. I don't know if that heater exposes itself, what it's going to do to this plastic, and if it could actually melt through it. So what I'm probably going to do is stick the heater in one of the glass tanks. It'll have the same effect anyway, so it'll still be circulating through the tank. It'll still do the job and heat the system up, regardless of where I put it on here. So I think just to be safe, I'm going to put the heater in one of the breeding tanks. Even though it's ugly, I'm not overly concerned because it's just a breeding tank. I'm not going to be sat staring at it in my living room. But really happy with that. I've had the final piece delivered today, so let's take a look at that. So this tank's 120 litres, so it's a little bit smaller than the one underneath, and the reason being is I can't fit another tank in this area because of these beams at the top, so I've had to settle for a slightly smaller one, but it should be perfect for housing peacocks and having a little group of peacocks breeding in this tank anyway, so I'm not overly concerned about it. But in part 2, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you exactly how to drill this tank. We're going to paint the back of it, and then we're going to plumb it into the system. This is one of the final pieces of the puzzle. So as soon as it's plumbed, we can start experimenting with filling it up and how the flow is going to work on there. So this is going to be its own little mini series on the channel. So if you're enjoying these videos and you're liking these little DIY bits, then make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon. I upload every single week, so it's either a Saturday or a Sunday where I'll drop a video. If I'm not going to drop a video, I'll let you know in the posts, but I usually do every week anyway. So make sure you subscribe to the channel, come back for part 2, and I'll show you exactly how I drill the tanks from scratch. We'll plumb this in, and then we're getting closer to this being ready to go.